just going to click on 10 over the hour. Hello, I'm Lucy. I'm doing super secret spying on super awesome animals. I tell you what though, there's a bit of a problem. Number one, not a very good spy because I just broke the main rule that I told you I'm a spy, which is a problem. Fortunately, I'm a marginally better animal biologist, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So first of all, I have a question for you. What is the furthest you've ever travelled all on your own? On your own two legs, what's the furthest? Shout it out to the screen. Well, once I did a marathon, which is 40 kilometres or 26 miles, and I ran that all on my own. It took me 3.5 hours. It was absolutely exhausting. But you know what? Animals are amazing because it turns out that animals are way better than that. Most animals, most birds can actually travel a marathon every single day. And some of the birds that I've been studying as a biologist do that. So I'm a biologist at a university. So I spend half of my time like a teacher talking about amazing animals, and I spend half of my time doing research on them. And that means that I get to travel to amazing places all over the world to work on a range of really cool animals. I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was about 10 years old. I love the sea. I like looking at the sea. I like being in the sea. I like things that live in the sea. And so my dad took me scuba diving when I was only 10 years old. I'm not sure how much of a good idea that is, by the way, but anyway, he did. And ever since then, I was like, I'm going to be a marine biologist. I went to university. I studied marine biology. And then I went to work in America on a project working on something called sea turtles, which I'm going to tell you about later. And then eventually I became a university lecturer. So now I have a permanent job as a university lecturer, and so I get to teach students all about biology and study it myself. So first of all, I want to tell you about this amazing animal. This is a bar-headed goose. You can tell that because it's got bars on its head. This particular bar-headed goose is called Jemima, because we like to name animals, and Jemima is a very cool name. And this particular bar-headed goose lives in somewhere called Asia, and it makes an enormous migration. Migration is when you travel between two places on the planet. So this bird likes to spend the summer here in a place called Mongolia. But Mongolia is wonderful. I've been there. The food's not great, but the scenery is incredible and people are magnificent. But it gets a bit cold in the winter. So what the bar-headed goose does is it migrates all the way across the Tibetan plateau to India, which is here for the winter. So it does this enormous journey all on its own. And it can fly a marathon every single day, which is pretty amazing stuff. And then it spends the winter in India, and then it will fly back over the Himalayan mountains, back up to Mongolia again the next summer. And we know this because we use something called a tracking tag. And this is what a tracking tag that we would put on a bar-headed goose looks like. These cost sometimes a few £100 to a few £1,000. And what we do is we put them on an animal just like a backpack. So a little bit like this, we put the tag on the bird, And the bird travels off, and as it's flying along, the backpack is sending out a message, and it sends it up to something called a satellite. And did you know that planet Earth is surrounded by lots of satellites just like these? These belong to a system called the Global Positioning System, very fancy name. But what it basically means is, and all of these satellites can actually hear the messages coming from the backpack, and they can say, I heard it over there. And another satellite says, I heard it over that way as well. And together they can put it together and work out exactly where on the planet an animal is. And this is called GPS tracking. So today we're going to tell you about GPS tracking of bar-headed geese. And so we do it with these special tags which go on the birds just like a backpack. I'm going to take my backpack off because you all know where I am. I'm here on mine. When the bar-headed goose gets to India, it then might bump into other animals like this one. This is a dragonfly. It's called a globe skimmer dragonfly. This particular dragonfly's name is Sarah, which is named after a very beautiful lady. And this dragonfly is really special because we think this dragonfly probably flies from India, here, all the way across the Indian Ocean to a place called Africa. A tiny dragonfly. These are about this big in real life. And we think they can make this whole journey on their own. That's like traveling 70 million times your body length, which is just amazing. So we think these might be some of the longest distance migrating animals in all of the world. So they can make this whole journey across the entire Indian Ocean. Now, because a dragonfly is very small, I can't put a backpack on it. Imagine trying to put that tag on that tiny little dragonfly. It wouldn't be able to fly anywhere. So instead, what we can do is we can study dragonflies using something called radar. You've probably seen radar data, you don't even know it. You know when you watch the weather after the news in the evening, and sometimes they say it's going to be sunny tomorrow, it's going to be wonderful. Sometimes they show a picture and you can see like this colourful rain coming across, and they say tomorrow it's going to rain. That's a radar. That's what radar data look like. And because a radar is able to pick up raindrops in the sky, it can also pick up something as small as a dragonfly. So it turns out that we can track even very small things like insects using something called radar. So that's the second method of animal tracking that I'm telling you about today. So these dragonflies make it all the way over to lovely Africa, where they spend the winter. It's a fantastic place to spend the winter, by the way. And while they're there, they might bump into something like this. This is a sea turtle. It's actually called a loggerhead sea turtle because its head is really big like a log. There are 7 species of sea turtles altogether, and this is one of them. It's also my favourite. This particular turtle is called Sebastian, and he's really good because he crawls around on the sand. He makes a bit of a mess, but you know, so he's a loggerhead sea turtle. And there's lots of these living all over the world in really nice warm places. So kids out there, if you're thinking of being a marine biologist, study these because they live in lovely countries where it's nice and sunny, you get a tan, wonderful beaches. That's what I did for the beginning of my career. So these animals are really, really easy to track because they've got this shell, and their shell is hard. And so it's like gluing something onto a tabletop. So we can take one of these GPS tracking devices and we can glue it onto the shell of the turtle. And in real life, these turtles are about as big as a table. Their shell can be maybe this big. So a little tag like this is tiny on their shells. So we like to track turtles like Sebastian the turtle by gluing a little tracker onto their back. And whenever they come up to the surface of the sea, they shout out their message, I'm number 8 over here, I'm number 8 over here. And those GPS satellites I was telling you about can hear the turtle and work out where it is on Earth. How cool is that, right? Sea turtles are also really cool because there are I mentioned only 7 species of them in the world, but they have been endangered. And endangered means that we unfortunately killed lots of them and there weren't very many left. And lots of scientists have been working really, really hard for decades now, and their populations appear to be increasing in at least some countries, which is really good news. So not only do they live in cool places, but they're a story that makes you feel happy about what we can do to help conserve wildlife. Okay, When these turtles are swimming around in the sea off the coast of Africa, particularly on West Africa, which is over here, sometimes they might bump into some other cool animals that live in the sea with them, such as this. This is a very fast bluefin tuna. This is one of the most exciting fish in all of the sea. It's incredibly fast, and so this bluefin tuna is called Tyra the tuna. Zoom, she's very quick. So Tyra the tuna can grow up to 2 meters long. That's as big as a grown adult person. So they're really, really big fish. And they are also the most expensive fish in the ocean. And once somebody in a fish market in Japan paid over $3 million to get one of these to serve in his restaurant. Sorry, Tyra the tuna. Anyway, so these are really exciting fish. And they zoom around the ocean, but because they're so tasty, we've eaten lots and lots of them, and there haven't been very many of them left. So we've been tracking these as well. And we track these with a different type of tag, one that looks like this. So I mentioned that these fish in real life are about the same size as a person. So this tag isn't that big. And this tag goes on the back of the tuna fish like this. And this tag records things like how deep the tuna is diving and how warm the water is where it is. But it also records light through something that we're going to call light geolocation. So this is really cool, right? Impress your friends with this fact. Okay, so you know that the light comes up. Sorry, here's a graph, a scientific graph, which shows that the sun comes up in the morning about breakfast time. At lunchtime, it gets lighter, and by dinner time, you expect it to get dark again. So how light is it against the time of the day? So here in England, where I am right now, the sun comes up in the morning around breakfast time. It's at its brightest about lunchtime, and it goes back down by the time I have my dinner. Imagine you made a phone call to one of your friends, and your friend said to you, well, actually, where I am, it turns out that it's light by about breakfast and it starts to get dark by lunchtime. And you'd be like, what? How can it be dark by lunchtime where you live? Well, the answer as to why it can get darker is because they're not in the same place as you. They're probably somewhere to the west. So it turns out the sun comes up first over here, and then it starts to be breakfast time here, and then it's breakfast time here, and it's breakfast time here because of different time zones all over the planet. So I know if your light comes up earlier in the day, you must be to the west of me. And that means that I know something about what's called your longitude. Longitude is where you are on the planet from left to right. So I can tell just by measuring light what your longitude is of the place you're at right now. How cool is that, right? It gets cooler though, because also I know that the sun comes up about breakfast time and it goes down about dinner time. But imagine if I spoke to another friend and they said to me, yeah, same for us, but the sun comes up at about 4 o'clock in the morning and it doesn't go down till nearly 11 o'clock at night. And I'd be like, what? Where are you? And it turns out that the closer you go to the poles, so all the way up here to the North Pole or all the way down here to the South Pole, the length of the day, how long it's light for, gets longer and longer and longer. So if I know how long it's light for where you live, I can tell something about your latitude. And that is how close are you to the top of the pole and to the bottom. So by measuring light, I can tell where you are, east to west. And by measuring light duration, how long it's light for the course of the day, I can tell where you are up and down on the planet. And that's what this tag is doing. It's just measuring light, it's recording the light, and when I get the tag back again, I can then work out where the fish was on the planet. How amazing is that? Who knew that light would tell you all about geography? But it's true. Now, bluefin tuna, I mentioned, are very exciting fish. Everybody thinks they're really, really cool. And it turns out that here in England, we've actually got quite a lot of these bluefin tuna. And they're very exciting fish. You can find them off the southwest coast of England, which is where I am right now, actually. But you also get them all the way up into Scotland. And when these fish are in Scotland, they might also bump into some more very cool animals like this one. This is a basking shark. Look how massive it is. It's the second biggest fish in all of the sea. And this particular basking shark is called Big. Benjamin. This is Benjamin the basking shark. He's big, he's got a huge mouth, and he's really hungry right now. So as I mentioned, they're the second biggest fish in all of the sea, but actually they're not very dangerous. Because if you have a look at his mouth, can you see any teeth? Nope, they don't have any. Well, actually they do, they've got very, very small teeth, but basically they don't have any teeth. And that's because all they like to eat is plankton, which are little tiny animals which are all in the water, a little bit like humpback whales. They eat those as well. So they're just going along with their mouth open, eating plankton. They wouldn't attack you, so they're perfectly safe to get in the water with and go for a snorkel with, which I have done, and it is pretty cool. When you see a shark like this coming towards you, this shark can be bigger than a car. In fact, it can be almost as big as 2 cars next to each other. So these are absolutely massive sharks. A little bit scary when you see them. It does make you go a tiny bit, but they're really, really cool. And one of the really cool things about these sharks is that nobody anywhere in the world knows where they breed. Now, any children out there saying, what is breeding? Here's an idea. Why don't you ask your mummy and daddy? Because we're all at home at the moment and we've not got much better to do. And I think I'm going to skip past that bit. But anyway, nobody knows where they breed. And so we're attempting to find out using this. Now, this looks completely mad. This is a special camera. And this camera fits into a tiny little boat, like a jacket. And then the shark pulls this little boat along behind it. And the camera is actually filming out of here and out of here. So we can actually see if the shark hangs out with some other sharks, starts doing something called courting, which is an old-fashioned term meaning when you get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and eventually breeding. Again, ask your parents what that means. So that's what this is for. And so far, we've been using these in Scotland, and we've seen the sharks hanging out together in a very suggestive way. So we're hoping to discover for the first time ever where basking sharks breed. And if we know that, then we know that Scotland might be one of the most important places in all of the world for basking sharks. Okay, when these basking sharks are swimming around in the waters of Scotland, they might also come across a very small but a very cool bird called an Arctic tern. Now, I've got this Arctic tern here on a stick, but normally it would be going like this. I work on these birds in Iceland, which is a place where they like to have their babies, they have their eggs, but they also lay their eggs in Scotland as well, in Canada, Greenland, lots of really cool places all around the top of the Arctic around here. And if you go near their babies, they come out of the sky and they attack you in the head and they say, get away from my babies. So they're really, really good mummies and daddies because they look after their babies really, really well. Now, this particular Arctic tern is named after an incredibly cool animal called Simba. This is Simba, the Arctic tern, because it's one of the best animals in all of the world. And this animal makes the most amazing migration of any bird. As I mentioned, it lays its babies here, but in the wintertime, it goes all the way down to Antarctica for the winter. So one of these birds does something like 80,000 kilometers over the course of a year. 80,000 kilometers is so far, it's almost inconceivable. I can run a kilometer in about 5 minutes. So 80,000 kilometers would take me days and days and days to do. And I couldn't do it because I'd run out of energy and I'd collapse and I'd die. But these birds do it every single year for all of their life. In fact, they travel so far that over the course of their lifetime, they can make it to the moon and back 3 times. So Simba, the Arctic tern, is about the coolest animal there is on the planet, in my opinion, and I'm currently studying them. Okay, if you want to join in animal tracking, and I think you should because it's one of the funnest things you can do with science, you can have a look at some of the links underneath this video where I've put some websites where you can see live tracking data from various different websites. So you can type in different types of animals you want to have a look at and you can see maps showing where it is that they go all over the world. And then I like to imagine making that journey myself and thinking about how incredibly difficult it is. So, to recap, hopefully now you know about migration. You know that's the journey of an animal from one place to another all across the planet. You know a bit about GPS tracking. That's attaching cool devices onto animals so that we can follow their movements using satellites. You know a bit about radar, which is this really cool thing that we use to tell the weather, but that we can also use to see where animals are above us. You also know about this very cool thing called light geolocation, where just by measuring light, I can tell your longitude and your latitude of where you are on the planet. Pretty cool, huh? Now, I'd like to take some questions from some people. So I've got a wonderful assistant next door who's reading the comments down the side so that they can bring me questions, and I've got one already. Hang on a second. Okay. Do all birds migrate? Actually, no. So it turns out that most birds migrate, but not all of them do. So for example, at the moment, I'm studying a really cool bird called an oyster catcher, which weirdly doesn't actually catch oysters, but let's not worry about that. It does sometimes, but most of the time it eats mussels. Anyway, and it can make a journey from here, where I live in the southwest of England, up to Iceland. So from here to here. But the problem is Iceland gets really, really cold in the winter, so most birds leave. But turns out some oyster catchers hang out there for the winter. And I don't know how they cope with it being so cold there. And the food's probably maybe a little bit more difficult to find, but they stay. So some birds don't migrate and other ones do. But the cool thing about birds is that because they're amazing athletes and because they can fly, they can cross huge distances all over the planet pretty easily, really. So it's like going like, yeah, I could go on holiday. I'm pretty much going to because I can. And that's one of the reasons I love birds, as you can tell from my amazing jumper. Do we have another question next door? Oh, here we go, here's another one. The most difficult animal to tag. Ooh, that's a really good question. So, bar-headed geese, the ones I mentioned at the beginning, Jemima, the bar-headed goose, they're quite difficult to catch because they can run really, really fast. And when we catch them in Mongolia, we have to run after them as fast as we can. And we have to herd them into a net, a bit like border collies herd sheep. And we try running around to herd them into a net. It's incredibly difficult. It took us about 2.5 years to work out how to do that. So that was quite difficult. Sea turtles are very easy to tag because they're very slow. They crawl around on the beach while they're laying their eggs, and so they're very easy to find. And Arctic terns are quite easy to catch, like Simba the Arctic tern, because they attack you in the head, so you can just catch them quite easily. So I would say probably the bar-headed goose. But it's so fun. Be a scientist because you get to do things that other people can't. Okay, next question. How do you tag a basking shark? With difficulty. So, because a basking shark is so big, I said they were like twice the size of a normal car, it's very, very difficult to get one to stop. Our boat's only about 8 to 10 meters long, and we can't catch a basking shark. So what we have to do is we have to go past it with the tag, and we put the tag on the end of a pole. And what we do is as we go past it, we go and we put the tag onto the shark, and hopefully the shark lets us do it, because if they don't want us to tag it, they can just go under the surface of the water and there's no way we can stop them. So we have a very long pole and we go pop it onto the shark that way. It's fun. Okay, next question. Does the Arctic tern go the furthest? Yes, it does. As of all the animals we've tracked in the world, the Arctic tern goes the furthest. So it can do 80,000 kilometers a year. But we're tracking them right now in Iceland, up here. Yay, Iceland. And we've discovered that when they just pop out to the shops to go get some food, to go pick up some fish to give to their babies, they can probably do about 100 kilometers in just a day. So it's like they do 2 to 3 marathons every day just to pop to the shops to stock up on some fish to bring back to their babies. Isn't that amazing? I think it's pretty cool. Oh, I think I've got another question coming. This is wonderful. Thank you so much. Wonderful assistant. What's the most interesting thing I found that I didn't expect? Ooh, that's a really good question. Well, bar-headed geese travel over the Himalayan mountains, which are the highest mountains in all of the world. And there's actually winds that blow up mountains, up the slope every single day. And I thought that if I was a bar-headed goose, I would wait until the wind was blowing up the mountains and then I would start flying so I could catch the wind. And instead what we saw is that none of them actually do that. All of them instead actually wait until nighttime, until the wind stops. and they like to fly when the wind is very, very calm. And we think it's possibly because they like to have more control. They don't want to get like, woo, whooshed around the place. But we think it might also be because when the air is colder, the air is also thicker. So when you have to flap your wings like a bird to fly, there's more to kind of push against. So we think that's possibly the other reason that they fly at night. So hopefully that answers that. That and how difficult they were to catch. I really didn't expect that. What is the fastest bird? Good question. Well, it depends if you mean one that just goes straight past you, or one that can keep running all the time. So we could be talking about Usain Bolt doing 100 meters, or we could be talking about Eliud Kipchoge, who's the man who holds the amazing world record for the fastest that a human can run a marathon. So if you want the fastest that any bird can travel at all, it's got to be a species of what's called a raptor, like an eagle or a falcon or something like that. And they can make these incredible dives like a peregrine falcon and go through the air very fast. But the fastest bird over distance is something called a great snipe. It's a small brown bird, and they can do something like 80 kilometers an hour for a week. So they can keep flying at 80 kilometers an hour for a week. So incredibly fast. Fun fact, a military sniper, again, children, ask your parents what that is, a military sniper gets its name from the snipe. And that's because this bird has a way of flying around that it kind of goes, whizzes around all over the place. And if you were a hunter that was skilled enough to be able to shoot a snipe, sorry about that, snipe, then you were a very, very skilled shot and you were known as a sniper. So military snipers get their names from the birds. But anyway, on to cheerier things. Could a basking shark swallow you accidentally? I kind of worry about that. Its mouth is big enough, but when I've snorkeled with basking sharks, it's a wonderful and exciting thing to do. And whenever they come near you, they kind of go around you. They don't really want to be very close to you. So I suppose in theory, you could, yes, get accidentally swallowed by a basking shark. I believe somebody was once accidentally, in the last few years, swallowed by a whale, which apparently coughed them up again. I've never heard of anybody being swallowed by a basking shark, and I don't think it's a serious risk. And I think more than that, when we're all allowed back out of our houses again, I thoroughly recommend you go and see one of these wonderful species that I've been talking about because they're incredible. I've got another question. So geese don't soar like a condor? No. And we know that because one of the devices that one of the tracking tags that we've put on geese is a little bit like, anybody got one of these fancy watches that tells you how many steps you've done? Let's see how many I've done today. Oh, 5,066. I've got some more to do yet. Anyway, we've put a tag just like that on a bar-headed goose, so we can tell exactly how much it's moving all of the time. In fact, we can measure how much it's moving about 180 times every single second. So we know about every time it beats its wings, how much it's beating its wings by lots, or just a little bit, and we can tell that they don't soar. They don't ever seem to stop flapping. Even when they're traveling downhill, they still keep flapping their wings a little bit. Isn't that crazy? Here's another question. How endangered are sea turtles? Well, considerably less than they used to be, but there's probably still only about 1% of the sea turtles left that there used to be. Although, as I mentioned, for some populations, that number's increasing, which is really good news. The biggest threat to sea turtles, unfortunately, is eating fish. As in, when we get fish to eat, the fishermen that put the nets out accidentally, they don't want to, but accidentally sometimes catch turtles. And sea turtles have to breathe air, so if they get caught in the nets, they can drown quite easily. So the fishermen don't want to do it. It's not their fault, but unfortunately, quite a lot of the time, turtles can get caught in fishing nets. I love sea turtles, I really, really do, but they're not the smartest animals in the world. Why are geese a bit grumpy? I wish, that's such a good question. They are so grumpy. I don't know, but they're so grumpy. I mean, whenever I'm near geese, I'm usually trying to pick them up because I'm trying to put a GPS tag on them. So I always kind of figured that that's probably worth being grumpy about. If you caught me and you trick when an animal has a personality, I really like it when an animal's kind of like, stay away from me, I don't like you. I think that's a really cool thing. Which animal would I most like to work with? That's a fantastic question. I'd love to work with manta rays. I actually published a scientific research paper about manta rays using tracking data, but unfortunately I wasn't in the team of people that put the tag on it in the first place, and I'd really like to see one, so I'd really like to work on manta rays. My dream was always to work with Arctic terns, and I'm now getting to do that, which is wonderful. But also, I really like gulls. I don't know, like lots of you out there are probably thinking, no, gulls are rubbish because they steal your chips and they can be quite aggressive. Houses, they live around our cities, they live in our seas, they live in our rubbish tips, they live on our fields. And I think they can tell us a lot about how we're starting to move into natural habitats that we probably shouldn't be. Who provides the money for this research? Fantastic question. It's hard to get money to do this sort of research. The money I've had some funding from National Geographic Society. I had to apply for a research grant and I was evaluated along with a lot of other people. So that was a competitive process. Some of the other funding I've had has come from aquariums. So they've been able to take some money from the price of the tickets that they sell to come to the aquarium to spend on tracking tags. Some of the money has come from government. So particularly Spanish governments helping me to do some tracking of turtles in West Africa over here. But it's difficult money to get, and ultimately we should track animals because they can teach us more about how to look after the planet better. So some of the work that we're doing at the moment is to try to use these animals to tell us where the most important places on the earth are that we need to protect for conservation. Great question. Which turtle travels the furthest? This, I think, would be a turtle called the leatherback turtle. So it has a back that's kind of covered in a leathery shell. And these turtles are constantly moving over all of the ocean. So they don't really have like a favorite restaurant or a favorite place to go and feed. They just keep moving around all over the time. So they probably travel the furthest. They probably clock up the most miles on the clock in their car, if you like. They're also the biggest turtles as well, so they can get to be over 2 meters long, so much longer than I am tall. I'm not that tall, but you know, so they're really, really big turtles, and they can weigh like a ton, and they're black and they have these like really cool shells. So I think it's a leatherback turtle. Can this research be accessed from a classroom? That's a fantastic question. So please do have a look at the web links I put below. There's a link to 3 different websites where you can have a look for tracks. The best one for school, because I notice you're from a secondary school, is the seaturtle.org link that I put below. They're not all sea turtle tracks. There's tracks from all sorts of different animals there. And I believe there are educational resources on that website as well. But fantastic question, because animal tracking is cool. And as I mentioned, we name these animals. We do legitimately give them names. And sometimes we name them after famous people, or sometimes we name them after people that we love. And it's fantastic when you look up to see where Simba the Arctic tern has gone. What can the public do to help birds, sharks and turtles? That's a fantastic question. Well, one thing you can do for sure is to make sure that if you're eating seafood, so fish and things like that, that you buy them from places that say that they try their hardest not to catch any animals. So, for example, any of you eat shrimps or prawns, which are delicious, you can actually install a special kind of metal grid inside of the net that they use to catch the prawns, which means that if any turtles get sucked into the net, they get automatically spat out the side and they don't drown and die. And I think for animals living in the sea, choosing the fish that you eat very carefully is the very best thing that you can do. To help birds, that's a tricky one. I suppose the main thing is that when birds go to lay their nests and have their eggs, they need to try to lay them in undisturbed places that are free of pollution and noise and buildings and things like that. So we want to make sure that we don't move too much into natural habitat. So we try to make sure that we stay in places that aren't new and developing the countryside. Okay, that's all we've got time for, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been wonderful to talk to you all. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Lucy Hawkes. It's got, again, a link below. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow for, later today at 6:30 for another amazing Earth Live lesson. And these lessons will be carrying on, so please check back every single day for more. Thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe, take care, and don't forget to look after our planet. Thank you. Bye.